captured my heart with this love, 'cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. You open my eyes to wonders new. You captured my heart with this love, 'cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. Beautiful one, I love. Beautiful one, I adore. Beautiful one, my soul must sing. Beautiful one, I love. Beautiful one, I adore. Beautiful one, my soul must sing. Beautiful one, I love. Beautiful one, I adore. Beautiful one.
All right. So if you didn't know, we used to have like 600 now worship center over there, and like we had this huge thing that was all week. It was in the morning, but this year we did it a little bit different, and we made it so that parents were with their kids, and it was a lot smaller. And if you're curious, you're like, Noah, why did that look like you? That was my handsome twin brother. Yeah, and so his name's Cosmo. But if you're like, that looks like a lot of fun, I want to do that next year, we would love to have you guys. It's super fun. Matt always gets whipped cream on his face. I get shoot with some type of water. It's a blast. But, so that was this past week, and it was a lot of fun. With summer coming up, if you don't know, in about 2 weeks, we're going to head, which is super exciting. Whoop, whoop. So, we will have youth group this Wednesday. We will have youth group the following Wednesday, and then July 12th, we will not have youth group. You can show up to the church, but no one will be there because a lot of us will be down in Ensenada. And then on Sunday, we will have service in here, but next 2 Sundays, we will not have youth service, okay? So on the 9th, we will be going down to Mexico, and then on the 16th, we will have one service, I believe, 10 o'clock, where it's the whole church, kind of like we've done, where people who've gone to Mexico kind of share some of their stories, and we have a big Mexico Sunday to welcome the team back. So next week, yes, Sunday, and then the following 2 weeks, no. And then, this is the last thing, I know, it's like fire hose. Today is our Panda Express fundraiser. All you need to do is, today after church, go up to mom and dad, give them the puppy dog eyes, say, Mom, you know, it'd really make my Sunday if we go to Panda Express. And then she's going to be like, oh, okay, so you guys are going to go to Panda Express. And then when you guys are there, all you do is you take one of these flyers. And so there's some on that black table that's in there. And when you get up, after you order your double orange chicken and double chow mein like me, you walk up and you're just like, hey, I'm supposed to show this. Okay. And then 20% of your meal goes to our Mexico team. So that's it. You just have to make sure you take this flyer in, because if you don't show the flyer, it doesn't count. You can also do it on your phone. That's how I do it, because I'll forget this. But there's like a code. You punch the code in when you check out on your phone, and it goes. So if you need help, feel free to ask me. But if you want to help out the Mexico team, help send us down to Mexico to build 3 houses for some families, a really easy way to do that is just eat Panda Express. You get food, and we get fundraised for it. It's a win-win. Ouch. All right, it's all right, yeah. All right, cool. So, welcome to the last part of Ghosted. We've been looking at what to do when God seems silent, because there's going to be times in our faith when we're going through hard times. It feels like God is not there. It feels like God's not listening to us, and He's walked away, when in reality, in our lives, He's doing stuff in our lives. And me and Matt have enjoyed this series so much, because a lot of times when we talk about the Bible and we talk about different people and different we hear it and say, well, that won't apply to me because I'm never going to find myself in this situation. Oh, well, that's different because I'm not there yet. Oh, well, and we find a way to work ourselves out of the situation, and then we don't pay attention for the rest of the time. And the hard part is when we don't pay attention, when we do get there, we don't know what to do. We're like, man, it would be great if we could talk about this, but that's not always how it works. However, with this series, at some point in all of our faith journeys, we will come to this. At some point And all of our journeys, as we're learning about God, we're going to come across a time where we're going to face trials, we're going to face these temptations, and we're going to feel like God is distant. We're going to feel like God has turned his back on us. And for a lot of people, I don't need that anymore. And for a lot of people, this moment when they feel like there's just this gap between them and God is the make or break part of their faith. They will either do one or two things. They're going to persevere and continue to pursue Jesus, continue questions. Although they're struggling in their faith, they're going to continue to pursue, or they're going to give up. They're going to walk, and they're not going to care anymore. And maybe you're still, but you're just doing it because you got to get in the car on some Sunday. But everyone in this room is going to have to make the decision. At some point in our lives, we're going to say, I'm going to continue to follow Jesus, but I don't want to do this anymore. For whatever reasons, maybe you feel like God's not listening, he's too distant, or whatever reasons, but everyone in this room will have to make this decision at some point. And I've loved this series because a lot of times that gap that we feel, where we feel like, oh, well, God doesn't care about me, God doesn't love me, is just a simple misunderstanding. And we get mad at God for being silent because we feel like he's not listening when in reality, he's working on our lives and he's taking away the pieces that are good for us, the things that he give us so he can make us into his new creation. But we leave his arms before he can ever give us what we truly deserve. And that's what this amazing thing about God is that he wants this relationship with us. He wants to give us what's ours. And so if we ever find a time where we realize, oh, I did leave Jesus' arms. I did turn my back from him. When it felt like I was struggling with stuff, instead of God on me, I turned my back on God. He's still standing there saying, I just want you to come home. It's okay. Let me give you what's yours. And there's this song called Loyal by Lauren Dan. Great song. If you haven't heard it, highly recommend it. But it's a song about her faith and her relationship with Jesus. And there's this line in there. It says, "You are always there for me, and you listen every time I speak." And this whole song is about how Jesus is faithful, how Jesus isn't going to leave us. And there's a lot of parts in the Bible where it talks about Jesus being faithful and God being faithful to us. And in Psalm 119:90, it says, "Your faithfulness continues through all generations. You establish the earth and it endures." But here's the deal. When we talk about God being faithful, we need to make sure that we're being careful because although God is faithful, God is not a genie that can grant any wish that we can come up with. And when we pray to him, we're not praying for him to fulfill these wishes, saying, all right, God, today I need to win the lottery. And then poof, it happens. That's not how God works. But he's a faithful father that wants us to grow. Not only grow in relationship with him, but grow in relationship with the community and the people around you. And today we're going to be focused on this idea of perseverance. And those times when we are struggling with our faith for whatever reason, persevering in Jesus' name because we want to know who he is. This idea of pushing through even the hardest of times because we know that what God has in store for us is better than anything else this world can give us. When I was in high school and throughout college, I played rugby. Reason why my knees are so bad. But if you don't know anything about it, you've never seen it, it's this nonstop game. Like soccer, soccer doesn't have breaks unless there's an injury. But even still, in rugby, if someone goes down, the medical team will run on the field and they'll treat them and the game will continue to go. It's pretty crazy. But it's also full contact but without any pads. And it is the greatest sport in the world, but I know I'm a little biased. And my favorite part when in rugby is when the night was over and I got to go home and I got to take my shower and wash all the dirt and debris and sometimes blood off of me, and I got to see all the new cuts and bruises on my body. It was so much fun. It was like Christmas every Friday night. Because throughout the game, you'd be thrown on the ground, you'd be dragged, you'd be beat up, hit, and it's probably happened. But through the whole thing, You have to persevere. If I get my foot stepped on, I'm like, man, my foot really hurts. Well, you're going to have to push through that a little bit. I was playing in a game with some friends, and the way it happened is it ended up being some of my teammates on the other side, and I was on my side. And at one point, I got tackled, and one of my teammates, one of my closest friends, my shirt and then dragged me along the ground, like on the dirt. It was a whole thing. But I was all right, I push through. Like I have to keep going. And in college, they have these rules where you're only allowed to substitute 3 people. So if you come off the field, you're done for the day. There's only one exception, and that's if you have, like, if you have a bloody nose or you're bleeding, you're allowed to go off, get it fixed, and go back on the field. But if you are injured in any other way, you go off the field, you're done for the day. And so when you get hurt, you have 2 choices. You can go off the field and sit on the sidelines for the rest of the day, or you can push through. And I remember when I first hurt my knee, I don't even remember which one, they're both bad, but I remember when I first hurt my knee and I was taken out of the game. They said, hey, before you go back in, like you need to go get it looked at. I went and got it looked at. They got an MRI, and it was a partially torn ACL. And they can't fix it. They can't fix it. They can't do surgery because they don't do surgeries on partially torn ACLs. So they just said, eh. And so I remember I went out and I practiced all week, got out there to the game Friday, and I'm warming up. Coach pulls me aside and he's like, how's your knee feel? And I'm like, oh, it's good. Like I'm fine. And he goes, all right, cool. Because I don't want you to play today. And I was like, excuse me, sir. I'm going to play today. And he's like, no. I'm not going to allow you. I was like, why? He's like, because as you're warming up, you're limping. And I was like, no. I want to play today because the team, they were like our rivals. Like we play them twice a year, and the second Monday starts, it's like, ooh, all right, we're playing that team. When I was in high school, there were different Clovis schools. It was Buchanan. Like Buchanan, that was the team to beat, all right? Now it's all one team. I coach Buchanan, okay? So don't be like, oh, you hate Buchanan. I coach. All is fair, all right? Time, right, when I was playing for Clovis High, Monday came around, we'd get in our huddle before hey, it's Buchanan week. And like we'd get fired up. And I make it all the way to Friday, and my coach is like, you're not playing. I'm like, and so after some back and forth, my coach is like, nope, you're gonna have to sit. And this idea of having to sit on the sidelines while my team led this charge to battle against our like greatest enemy at the time broke my heart. Because I tried my hardest. I had worked out. I had done everything I could to rehab my knee so that it would be 100%, but I wasn't allowed to play. I had to sit on the sidelines, and I watched this whole game unfold. And sometimes in our faith journey, we're faced with this hard where we're mentally injured in some way. We're going through this trial or temptation, and we're hurt in some way or another. When we're struggling with something in our lives, but the second we hit that hard time, we assume that God has abandoned us, that God doesn't care about us. And instead of like, I'm going to persevere, I'm going to push through, we choose to walk to the sideline. And we choose when we walk over and we sit down and say, one day when this passes, I'll be fine. And we let everyone else go ahead of us. But we don't stop there, because when we sit on the sideline, we sit there and we get to see all the other people that we grew up with in church, or maybe other people who persevered through their faith through these hard times, and we see them enjoying God's glory and everything that God has blessed them with. And then we sit on the sideline, then we get angry and say, well, God, why do they get that? When is it my turn? When do I get to enjoy your gifts? All the while we're just sitting on the sideline. Why don't I get to go enjoy that? Imagine if I were to call up the Chargers, Los Angeles Chargers. Right? I'm watching their games. I'm a huge fan. I know the players by name. I call them up. I'm like, hey, when is it my turn to score touchdowns? Right? Now, they just hang up. But let's just say they're like, oh, okay, well, what are your qualifications? What do you do that would give you a reason to score touchdowns? I'm like, nothing. Then they would hang up the phone. And the same thing, it happens in our faith where we get mad at God and say, God, why aren't you giving me what you have for me? Why aren't you blessing me? Look, I see what you do for everyone else, but why aren't you doing that to me? And God's saying, when's the last time you opened your Bible? When's the last time you went and talked to someone about Jesus? When's the last time you committed to church? When's the last time you did fill in the blank? And we just sit there, never. I, I gave up. It got hard. It got too hard. So I went and sat on the sidelines. And God's saying, I want you to come home. I want you to be with me. I want you to learn about me. I want you to be in community. I want you to do these things that are great. Because in order to succeed, get the gifts that God has for us, we have to get in the game. And the hard part is our lives can be filled with this unimaginable suffering. I know throughout this whole series I've talked about, we have drama with friends, maybe there's drama with school, or maybe, there's drama outside of it or whatever it is, but let's be honest, suffering applies to much more than that. Suffering applies to people passing away. Maybe I had a grandpa pass away of old age, and it was one of the things where he was getting sicker, and it made sense it made sense when he passed away because he was very sick. It still hurt. I mean, the list goes on and on. Whatever you can imagine, this world is dark and it's terrible and it's very hard. I mean, suffering is very deep. And we feel like God is being silent through it all. And in times of silence, it can lead to these struggles of faith. But even in our struggle or our frustration, our fear or our doubt, there's this sense that if I can hear God, if I can draw near to Him, then I can persevere. If I can dive deep into His Word and rely on the people who know Jesus, then I can do this. And we'll wonder why it's happening to us. And we're not going to fully understand what is happening, and that's okay. But you need to ask God about it. You need to take it to Jesus. It's okay to not understand. What's not okay is to sit on that non-understanding and let it rule our life. Because sometimes those things of, well, I don't fully understand, so I'm going to sit until I do. But if you never ask the questions, you're never going to understand. Because ultimately, it's healthy for Christians to take our fears, our doubts, our questions to Jesus and allow questions to be challenged by God's truth and good works. But we know that there will be times where we feel like God is being silent. But sometimes, I get it. It's hard going to the Bible for comfort because when we say the Israelites leaving Egypt, and we know that that was a hard time. But one chapter would be their struggles and everything that was going wrong, and then we turn the page, and it's them being rescued. And we're like, look at that. God set up just like that. But what we see is the 30 years in between those two pages. Because one verse is how they are hungry, and then the next one's how God provided. And it's this big dramatic show of how God provided, where this flock of people came in and they ate it, or manna came from heaven, or when Moses split the Red Sea, I was like, wow, this is great, dramatic. The ocean, like you would know that this is God. But if we look through all three Psalms, it's full of all these poets saying, has God forgotten us? Has He forgotten how to be gracious? Has He abandoned us? We haven't heard anything in a long time. Where is Jesus? Why is He being silent? And in the book of Isaiah, it promises this new king who's going to come and renew His kingdom on earth. He's going to be this king to lead all the nations, the King of Kings. And I mean, imagine hearing this at the time. If you remember, we went through Israelites really wanted a king, and it was Saul, and then it didn't go very well, and so it's going to lead along this path of really bad kings because they want this leader. And all throughout the Old Testament, it's how the Israelites just continue to mess up. And so, knowing of this time of struggle, all of a sudden you hear there's going to be this king who's better than anyone you can ever imagine, who's the King of Kings, better than anybody else. I mean, this would be exciting. Someone's going to come and just fix all of our problems. That's what I want. I mean, even today, if someone was like, hey, we're going to give you a president who's better than everybody else, I'm like, yes, please. And they would have gotten super excited about this. They would have been trying to, oh, well, maybe it's this guy. And they do. They think it's Elijah who's going to come down. Maybe it's, and they start trying to guess. But then they have to wait 500 years. There's a 500 complete silence. It was 500 years before Jesus came. But for us, age turn. It's going from Jesus is going to come, and then we turn the page, Jesus is here. But what we don't see is in between those pages is 500 years of silence. And during this time, there's a lot of really, really wise people who struggled with it, and they prayed about it, and they gave it to Jesus. But others turned their back and said, it's just a story. It's just this mythological story that they tell to get kids engaged so they can be good for their parents. But then this amazing thing happens, and we meet this man named Jesus. And sometimes we use the same logic with the Bible. Oh, it's just a load of stories. It's not real. It didn't actually happen. Look how God came through for all those people. When has he done something like that today? Obviously, he's not real. And we stop looking, or we stop caring. But in my experience, God never comes through in the way that we expect him to. We're expecting this amazing thing to happen where we're struggling and we're running late to that doctor's appointment, and all of a sudden all the cards are just going to part like the Red Sea, and we're going to make it there perfectly on time. When we're sitting in class, like praying for that test, hoping we get the A, all of a sudden an angel comes from heaven with the answer sheet. I mean, that's not going to happen, but we expect this big, miraculous thing to happen. But it doesn't. And so we assume it's not. And we stop looking, and we give up. And so fill in the blank. God works on God's time. God works on God's time. Because ultimately, when we look at the book of Isaiah, and it talking about Jesus, or even at the book of 1 Samuel, when they're talking about Saul becoming king, and they're asking God for a king, it would make sense for God to be like, oh, okay, here's Jesus. I just sent him early, and then all the problems are solved. But that's not how it happens. God works on God's time. And a lot of times, that's not our timing. And we assume that it's different because everyone in the Bible had these amazing things happen to them, and that the people never truly struggled with anything. But the person who knows struggle and writes about it frequently and writes about it a lot is Paul. And in 2 Corinthians, he talks about how he's struggled, and he takes a little bit of a boastful stance. But it's a stance of like, look at how much they're trying to stop me because of all the good for Jesus. And yet, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep persevering. And so we're gonna read it. It's up there for you guys. So he begins, it says, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I've received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have constantly been on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches, who is weak, and I do not feel weak, who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn. I mean, if there was a person who knew struggle, it was Paul. I mean, that is intense. I mean, he was whipped with the 39 lashes, and if you remember when we talked about it on Easter, the whips weren't like the normal Indiana Jones, like just made out of leather. They were embedded with glass and bone, so it could like grab the skin and be able to cut it. And on top of that, he was with rods. He was pursued by all of these people. He was shipwrecked out at sea. And all these bad things are happening to him. They even tried to stone him, which is how a lot of people died back then. He was shipwrecked. He was always having to move because there were so many people who wanted to harm him and stop him from preaching the gospel that he always had to move around so they couldn't find him. He was hungry, thirsty, cold. People trying to make him be quiet because the things he's writing is to the churches. Because at the time, the churches weren't taught preaching their own glory. Oh, you want to be, why don't you donate a lot of money to heaven? And the last thing the churches wanted to hear was what they were doing wrong, so they tried to pressure Paul to change his ways. And in fact, the book that it's from, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, is a letter to the churches in Corinth. And on top of all that pain, all that suffering, everything that Paul went through, in 2nd Corinthians 4, Paul says this, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." And when we read this first verse, we kind of get confused about it because we don't know what this jar of clay represents. When I was reading this and figuring it out, the only thing that popped in my mind is that scene from Pirates of the Caribbean when Jack Sparrow's like, "I have a jar of dirt," like I, I was confused by it. But a lot of times back in the day, if someone had to transport something of high in Pirates of the Caribbean, he's got the thing for Davy Jones, the jar of dirt, because clay doesn't have any worth. And so if I'm walking down the street with a jar of clay, no one's going to steal my jar of clay because it's a jar of clay. Like, no one wants that. Because like, clay itself has no value. No one really cares about it. It doesn't really matter. But what Paul is saying here is he's making this metaphor to what the gospel is like inside our lives. The gospel is this treasure that's found inside all of us. And our lives are these jars of clay. Which makes sense when he talks about this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. The gospel is something that we preach so that other people can see the treasure. They can see the power that it has. And I like how it ends when it says despair, but not, despair, persecuted, but not abandoned. Because if I were to show you this most eye-catching thing that was in this jar of dirt, you wouldn't really care about the dirt that was around it. It wouldn't matter what that treasure was set inside. Whatever container that I put it inside doesn't matter. You'd be like, "Look at this container. Isn't this cool?" And they're like, "It's just a jar of dirt." Like, no, let me show you what it actually is. It could be the shiniest thing. It could be the most technologically advanced thing that you've ever seen in the world. And what you put it in doesn't really matter. Because our lives don't need to be flashy. We don't need to do all these cool things to bring people into to Jesus, because Jesus' gospel itself is this amazing treasure that's found inside this jar of dirt, inside this jar of clay. And in this passage, there's this translation part that the NIV kind of misses when Paul says I am perplexed but not in despair. There are two words that are used there. There's these two Latin words, and they're really close together. Um, yeah, and so I'm going to do my best to say them. And if you want to mentally try and say them, you are more than welcome to. But I just wanted you guys to see how close together they are. So the aporo eumonoi and the exaporo eumonoi. Um, so is the aporo eumonoi is a loss of how to act. When you're just like, I don't know what to do in that situation. It's kind of like when you're maybe when you're driving and someone cuts off, and you have that moment, you're like, your parent might freeze, like, all right, that was a little bit close. You don't know what to do. Do you slam on the brakes? Do you speed up? Do you move over? You don't know. But then that second word, when Paul says despair, and it's exaporo eumonoi, I think I'm saying them right. I don't know. I tried. You guys see how difficult they are. But it's utterly at a loss. And so what Paul is saying here is sometimes I don't know how to act. Sometimes I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I need to do, but I never went off the deep end. I never gave up. I never walked to the sidelines and sat there until it made sense. And so Paul says he may have been at a loss of how to act, but he never went off the deep end. And next it says he's persecuted but not abandoned. And here that verb, persecuted, is commonly used in the Bible for like tracking an enemy or tracking prey like you would for hunting. And so we read about it earlier when he's being pursued or persecuted from city to city by these people. But through it all, God never abandoned him. God never gave him up. God never gave it to the point where these people were going to kill him. He was never abandoned through the whole thing. And we hear of Paul's face and say, well, it's easy for him because he had this faith that was strengthened by these hard times. I mean, this guy met Jesus. I mean, if Jesus stood up here right next to us, you all be like, yep, that's real. My faith will never be shaken. It doesn't matter what people say. This is Jesus. But at some point, Paul's faith had to begin. At some point, someone had to tell Paul about Jesus. And we know Paul was originally Paul who persecuted Christians, but still at some point, someone had to walk up to him and say, hey, did you hear about this Jesus guy? Let me tell you how he's wrong. Which then Saul on this journey to where he was eventually blinded, and he turned over to Paul and became one of the most influential people throughout the Bible. And although the church was much different than today, and today, at some point, Paul would have been here with all of us here, sitting in these chairs, learning about Jesus, just starting his faith, just starting to figure it all out, ask questions. But the difference is Paul continued to learn. He continued to ask questions. He continued to allow his faith to grow. So I imagine our faith is kind of like this lighter, and I brought extras. See how this works. Right? And so when we think about our faith, sometimes we say, well, there's no way that I can do things that great, that grand for Jesus. Like this. There it goes. Can you all see that? It's kind of dark. No. Have backups. Come on, Noah. Come on, Noah. There he goes. Yes? Okay, you know what? See, this is why I brought backups, because something, well, I'm trying to block it. Well, I tested earlier. All right, let's see. Maybe I get this one. No? There it is. Yes. Yeah, okay. If it blows out, remember this minute. All right. So our faith is kind of like this flame. And we're like, this flame can't do anything. What, am I supposed to get heat from that? What, am I supposed to get light from that? What am I supposed to do? What if there's a wind? What am I supposed to do? And then you start back up, and you get it going again. But here's the deal. A big fire that we see always starts with a single spark. Anything that we have, any fire that you can imagine, started with one small problem, one small spark. Even those big explosions that come out of nowhere starts with something super small that grows and grows and expands. And so, although you might feel like you have a faith that's super small, this paper, the fuel to the fire, asking questions when we're reading the Bible, when we're going to the people that we trust around us. Although we have faith that's small, it can still grow and it can expand. Pretty soon again, and it almost gets too hot for me to hold my hand. I was hoping that whole thing would burn up and then. But even still, that grew when I thought it was going to grow came from that small spark, the same one that we went, how is my faith anything? What am I supposed to get heat from that? What am I supposed to get light? What am I supposed to do with my faith? I don't have Bible verses memorized. I don't know this. I don't know that. I can't speak in front of faith's to do. But as we grow, as we ask questions, as we begin to add fuel to this fire, this spark that we call our faith, it will continue to grow. But don't get caught up in expecting this grand vision to happen to us where we're sitting in class and all of a sudden the clouds part and Jesus comes down and speaks, Noah, you will do this with your life. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be this grand thing. Because sometimes God speaks to us in ways that we never expect. Maybe it's when we're watching a movie or a TV show and all of a sudden something clicks. Or maybe it's when we're staring into space in class, paralyzed by everything that's going on in our lives, knowing I got a test. Or when we're at home, we're doing chores and we're just thinking of everything while we're sweeping the kitchen. God can speak to us whenever. It's not going to be this amazing, spectacular thing, so don't be looking for this grand entry of Jesus in our lives. One of the times that I felt Jesus the strongest was when I was in grade, walking back to my math class after going and picking something up from the office. And to be honest, I can't explain it. I remember I was walking. I remember exactly where I was. If you go to Clark, it was by the M wing. I was walking up that little ramp, and as I was walking up, all of a sudden, it felt like my chest was on fire, and I was like, man, I gotta tell people about Jesus. I was walking back to class. I can't explain it to this day. Even talk about it, I can still feel it inside of my chest. But if you will never fully understand what that feels like if you never commit to Jesus. If you don't allow God to work in our lives, you will never be able to experience what He has for us. And if we're overlooking for Him and saying, well, He's going to show up in one of these three ways, you're going to miss Him. But we have to persevere in times when we feel like God is, because we're all going to make a decision at some point to follow Jesus or to walk away from Him. And there's no middle ground. We need to hold fast to God's teaching when He's at work in our lives, but we don't really feel like it. There's this famous quote by an artist, Michelangelo, who's done plenty of famous works. He did the painting like the Sistine Chapel. Have you ever seen it? The Sistine Chapel is this big chapel, but he painted the ceiling. Gorgeous. But he's done a lot of marble work. I mean, it's impressive. And there's a saying where he says, in every block of marble, I see a statue as plain as though it stood before me, shaped and perfect in attitude and action. I have only to hew away the rough walls that imprison the lovely apparition to reveal it to the other eyes as mine see it. And now he said that very pretty. But what he's saying is, in every block of marble, I can see this statue. It's my job to release it. It's my job to break it out of this marble prison that it's in. And this is how God sees us. God sees us as this block of marble, and He says, I see what you can be. I can see what I designed you to be, and now I got to chisel away everything that makes you far from me, that takes you away from the creation that I made you. And so sometimes when we feel like God's being silent, it's because He's working on our lives. He's chiseling away that marble to take it away. And maybe sometimes he chisels away the things that we don't want him to. Things like our friends, maybe it's our hobbies, maybe it's a TV show that we really like, maybe it's that thing that we do when nobody's watching. But he chisels these things away from us. And I want to be clear, not everything that happens in our life that is trial or temptation is God chiseling it away. Sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes when someone passes away, it's not something that God removed from our life because that person was bad for us. That's not it at all. God uses situations like that for us to grow, but I don't want you to feel like when these bad things happen, you immediately think, well, God must have done it. Because our job as Christians isn't to try and place these pieces that God has put into our lives, but to put our trust in Him. And whatever happens, we know that we're going to pursue Him. As faithful Christians, it's our job to trust that God knows what's best to us. That even in these hard times that we're going to continue to push through. And so this is your last fill in the blank. We need to persevere. We need to push through. So I know today was a little bit longer. I appreciate you guys staying focused. I hope me burning my it all worthwhile. But as we wrap up this series of Ghosted, of what do we do when God seems silent and he feels in times where God feels so far away, well, we need to go to him with all of our questions, all of our doubts, all of our fears, all of our worries, because God is working in our lives. Like an artist who's working on a sculpture, he's chiseling away all these things that are bad in our lives. And they might not be the things that we're ready to give up just yet. But God is at work in our lives. And we need to trust in him. Because anything that's worthwhile takes time. Anything is worth doing needs to be practiced. People didn't just wake up and we're all of a sudden the greatest greatest in the world in something. So when we feel like God is silent, that's the time we need to draw nearer to him more. And when we have questions and we're uncertain and we feel like there's this big gap between Jesus and he's left us, are the times that we need to pursue him because he's working on our lives and he wants to give us what he's made for us. But he can't give it to us if we walk away before it's ready. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for all the amazing people in this room, Lord. I pray that as we continue our lives and as we reach that point where we have to decide if we're going to continue to pursue you or to walk away, that we can choose you, Lord. And we can continue to pursue you. And even if we have questions, even if we're unsure of what to do, that we can continue to follow who you are, Lord. That we can allow our doubts and fears to be challenged by your truth. Lord, I pray we can go out and be people who love you and glorify you, not because we're flashing, but because you are good and we want to glorify the kingdom. So we love you and we praise you. And in your name, amen.